everybody had a pleasant Easter. Whakatauki for this morning. I oria te tuatara ka waho, which means a problem is solved by continuing to find solutions. That's us. We have an apology from Councillor Rodway. I'd like to move that we set that. Thank you. Councillor Hodson, seconded Councillor Rose. All those in favour, please say aye. Yes. Carried. And noting that Councillor Roy will have to leave us partway through.
Depends how long we go.
Depends how long you go. Thank you. Any extra declarations of interest regarding any of the items today? No. We have no public forums, petitions or deputations. So we'll move on to the item 5, which is the confirmation of minutes of the meeting prior, which was, gosh, it was like a long time ago. The 5th of March. Was it?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Roy. Seconded. Councillor Morrison, any discussion or changes to those minutes? I think fairly well traversed through other council meeting actually.
Sorry, Chair, just for you. Can we get an update in terms of reference with the Deputy Chair's name on it?
Oh.
It's got TBC.
Oh, that's his new nickname.
In capitals. Thank you.
Sure thing. I'm really well into your list of things. Thank you, Councillor. In that case, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. There's been no notification of extraordinary or urgent business, and I've had no questions circulated, so we'll move on to Chairman and Councillors' reports. Item 8. Has anybody got a report, verbal report? Councillor Gibson.
I'll just do a verbal report on the trip to Glen Erie and having a look at the new station, which we were missing one of our key staff, but that didn't matter. So, one of the things, there's a whole lot of technical things that came out of it, even a brilliant speech from Mr. Roy, Sir Derek Roy, I think it will be very shortly. But I just want to say there was a whole lot of farming things which won't interest people around this time. But the thing with it is that came out with was nobody gets out of bed in the morning to ruin the environment. Now we need, I think, and I don't know whether I'm going to get support around this table, but we need to change our approach as a strategy to actually get that through our system, that we're looking forward to go and get things not tidied up, but improve things. And Councillor Pemberton, the other day, I noted, I wasn't here, but I did read it, that basically let's not look about the wetlands that we're losing, let's push the ones we're putting in. So we've got to go from where we are to a positive position.
Thank you, Councillor, for your comments.
Point of clarification. Sorry. Yeah, just putting words in my mouth, just making sure we are not letting wetland losses happen. That's all I want to clarify.
Yeah, no, that's your point. Yeah, give you that.
Thank you for clarifying that. Any other reports? Anybody been to anything interesting?
I'll just back up. I went to the same field day, Glen Erie Station, an amazing property, 68,000 hectares, I think, and just you know, some of us are farming a little bit less land than that to understand the scope and the scale and how they're actually looking after things and working through things, technology. It was impressive, and should be David Pinkney's obviously got a really amazing team with Simon Lee, the manager there, but just the scope of what they're dealing with, and different from tussock country right down to good flats, and they're dealing, and they were, you know, there were a few questions around winter grazing consents and things like that, and I thought they said it well, that, you know, it was actually about them building resilience for the future. They said not necessarily easy, but it was saying, hey, this is where we need to go to. So trying to implement some of our rules and things, which I know can be challenging at times, but they're in a large scaled system there. They're doing it. So it was a great day. It was a beautiful country, I have to admit. That's how I say.
Thanks, councillor. Chairman. Yes. Great, thank you. Let's move on to the reports, section 9. So 9.1 is the government legislation and policy monitor. And the team.
Through you, Chair, I just an introductory commentary. You'll note now amended format, which we promised you at the last meeting. And so you'll see here now the 2 new things from the legislation and policy monitor. One is a top 5 things for you to be aware of, which is in the cover paper. So you'll see that here appearing now. And then over the page, we now also provide you with an executive summary, because we do appreciate that there is a lot of material in the legislation and policy monitor, and that it changes from meeting to meeting. As always, the new information in the policy monitor is in red, and the intention is that we do a layered approach to continuing to keep you informed about critical reform program that impacts on what we do here at Environment Southland. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Hayley. Charlotte.
Thank you for that introduction, Hayley. So as usual, this item provides an overview of the current and upcoming national policy changes, focusing on those that are considered to be significant for this council's operations and the region, as well as being made publicly accessible through the inclusion with the agenda. The monitor is widely circulated to key stakeholders, including our iwi partner and interested businesses on a regular basis, and we have been receiving positive feedback consistently. After a very busy start to the year, activity on the national policy front has slowed somewhat in the last month. However, we expect several changes over the next few months, with activity peaking towards mid-year when the Planning Act and the Natural Environment Act are expected to land. As discussed, as mentioned by Hayley just before, the formatting has been adjusted in a few ways, and we trust these updates have made the results user-friendly. I'll now hand over to Nicole, who has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting and keeping the monitor up to date, and also sharing the monitor with the wider community. And Nicole will take you through the details of the key policy area.
Thanks, Paul.
Nakoto, today I'll present the policy monitor, highlighting the 5 key updates for the committee's focus. We'll start with page 21 of the agenda, the 2 resource management reform bills. Since the previous version of the monitor, we have presented an oral submission to the Environment Select Committee on March 18. We have received positive feedback on our written submission and were asked questions about our views on environmental limits and regulatory relief. The Select Committee is due to report back by June 26. Next, on page 25, the Department of Conservation has announced the new Predator-Free 2050 strategy to eradicate selected predator species in New Zealand by 2050. The strategy prioritises the 2030 goals of protecting threatened species, expanding innovations for tools, and promoting community-driven projects. Furthermore, feral cats have been added to the selected predator species list. On page 31, we've included an update from the Local Government Commission, as this work is closely linked to the government's Simplifying Local Government proposal. The Commission has now begun public engagement on the request for local government reorganisation in Southland, including an online survey and a series of public meetings. Findings from this phase are expected at the end of April, ahead of the next stage of investigation. Next, we flagged the Amended Legislation Act, which is intended to improve access to secondary legislation by requiring all agencies to publish the regulations, rules, orders, notices, etc. on their website or the redeveloped New Zealand legislation website, which is there to provide a single point of access for all secondary legislation. And finally, we have the Overseas Investment Amendment Act, in which reforms took effect in early March. These reforms include a single national test to assess whether an overseas investment would be conflicting to New Zealand's national interest, supported by a new 3-stage assessment process intended to simplify and speed up low-risk overseas investment approvals. These reforms are made to promote economic growth. However, increased investment activity could cause implications for land use, infrastructure demand, and environmental outcomes in Southland. And that brings me to the end of my report.
Thanks, Nicole. No, just must we proceed. Any questions, councillors, first of all? Right.
Yeah, look, I was interested in the secondary legislation thing. Is that in the City Council, or what is that can change in the increased transparency that they're asking for? What sort of things that they're one of your top 5 in secondary legislation reform and having it more transparent? What sort of things are secondary legislation and can
So the process of the amendment is mainly accessibility. So in the past, secondary legislation, including various regulations, policy statements, there had been a lack of uniform approach to making those accessible. So often we had to search through different ministries' websites to locate the document. But over the last year or so, the government has been trying to introduce more efficiency in providing access to those documents. Going forward, it is expected that those further regulations will be made available on one website through one platform.
Just to that, really important to note the staff comments that although the information is more accessible, the input to those decisions is minimal by anybody. So although they're making the decisions more accessible, there's no increase in input into the decisions because they're ministerial. Correct?
And if I may, Chair, yes, orders in council are secondary legislation.
Yes, exactly.
A formal notice as well. Rule notices, fees, the detail. Delegated responsibilities. So say we're MP.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson, otherwise known as TBC.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this also allows the legislation Amendment Act also allows those rules to be changed a lot easier. So that it creates a lot more flexibility within the government. Is that correct?
I can answer this one through you, Chair. Secondary legislation is much easier to change, and it's often that fill-in of detail. So that is correct. Secondary legislation does provide agility or flexibility, the ability to update, change, adjust far more easily and quickly than a full parliamentary process of primary legislation.
So if we're looking at changes in government, then we can potentially see quite radical change, well, not radical changes, but quite shifts in that framework, which without actually going through governmental process.
Councillor, I don't think this changes the process of those decisions. It is just changing the accessibility of the information. So that system already exists.
Yeah, but in behind it, I'm sort of, so from I suppose from a strategy position, trying to understand, Chair, what that might look like for us as far as shifting and changing.
Yeah.
Environment, like quality of environment, like, yeah.
Through you, Chair. That is correct, yes, yes. And as long as that secondary legislation still accords with the primary legislation.
Councillor Morrison, Councillor Morrison and then me. TBC also.
No signals on farm plans, no updates I see on the farm plan issue, or maybe that will be raised elsewhere in the discussion today.
Through you, Chair. Short answer, no.
Great, thank you for the short answer. The other second part of my question was, it's not included in the monitor because it's probably been and gone, but the Regulatory Standards Act, part 2 of that, must be fully enforced by the 1st of July of this year. And that imposes an expectation that when a government bill is introduced, the minister must ensure an explanatory note includes a consistency accountability statement and a ministerial explanation of any inconsistency with the principles. So that probably imposes an extra set of obligations that may not have existed in the past. And I guess that what my question kind of relates to is, as that comes in fully into force this year, how are we ensuring both central government proposals and our own responses are ready to meet the disclosure and justification expectations that carries? I guess what I'm saying is, in some respects, it might make it easier for us to submit on things, but also we need to make sure that we kind of understand that that's a change to our system and that we may need to adjust some of our practices to both benefit from that, but also acknowledge that maybe extra risk in it for us. Is that something that we've been able to give some thought to or considered?
Through you, Chair. Yes, we are always doing that forward scan, but I'd be happy to take that as a question and for us then to respond more formally to set out what we are doing with respect to ensuring that we're ready to meet those obligations 1 July in terms of our role as a participant in the system of the creation of new legislation.
Yeah, that would be helpful, I think, because I suspect that may influence how government goes about introducing new legislation, and I'm interested to see whether that triggers a bit of a surge of trying to get things before Parliament before the 1st of July obligation kicks in fully. There's not much time left to do that.
Through you, Chair, it may also adjust the strategy of how we frame submissions to ensure optimal impact of what we have to say with respect to ensuring a Southland voice is heard on important matters.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I've got one regarding the page 22, the planning heading, the RMA replacement legislation phase 3 heading on page 22. Though there's the reference to regional combined plans and spatial plans, and I wondered if it would be helpful if you could explain the difference between the two of those.
You, Chair, I'll get Liz to come up to support Shana on that one. She's very heavily involved in our staff leadership and our contribution to what is, I emphasise, a collaborative project across Murihiku Southland, including with our Mana Whenua treaty.
It's important for us all to understand the difference between a regional combined plan and a spatial plan, if there is a difference.
There isn't really a difference. The concept that's in the legislation at the moment is that there will be a regional spatial plan, and underneath that sits what they call in the combined plan, which is a series of chapters. So that's the land use chapter and the natural environment chapter. So it all actually combines into one plan. But the spatial plan is the guiding part that everything else falls out of. While we talk about it as two separate things, they're actually intricately woven together. What comes out of the spatial plan forms the guidance for those land use and natural environment plans.
through you, Chair, I would add that we are in the process of planning briefings to build your understanding of both of these processes. We'll be scheduling one ahead of the enactment of the legislation, and then there'll be further post the enactment of the legislation, because obviously things can change when they go through Parliament, but we prepare quite a fulsome briefing for you with respect to what the draft legislation says at this time. For regional councils, there'll be some element of new ways of thinking, particularly around the spatialisation of what we would typically see in our water and land plans, our air plans, and so on and so forth. But you're all very keen. No doubt you're going to nail it. It's a very prescriptive piece of draft legislation, very procedural, to make sure that we meet all of those legal requirements when we actually get into it. There's a significant team internally, both within Environment Southland, but also in the territorial authorities and with the Te Ao Marama staff as well, that are currently working on a proposal as to how we're going to undertake this to ensure that we are absolutely able to hit the ground running, because the timeframes within the draft legislation are incredibly tight, and we want to make sure that we put our best foot forward with respect to what the community's expectation will be of us as staff and yourselves as governors.
Chairman McPhail.
I've just been thinking here, whether I can provide clarity or it might provide less clarity in what I'm going to say. At the Glen area, around farm plans, the Glen area Field Day, a minister clearly stated that all farmers will be industry-led farm plans. This is in public. I had the fortunate discussion with him after it, indicating about, well, where does that leave our Appendix N and the rest of our farm plans in play. I'll say this because it's quite frustrating. He indicated, and he started using names in regards to putting things into plans. It was our fault, basically pointing the finger back at us. And let's just say the conversation went a bit haywire then when I stood up for Southland in my own usual way and very clearly indicated that it wasn't our problem. It's legislation made us, we're doing what the government wants us to do to fix the issues that we're dealing with here. So it didn't give me great, how should I say, I'm sure I've saved my words, hope that this is going to end up okay with the clarity about what's going to work and what's not. So he did indicate that things were, we should know sooner or later, like within the week or 2 weeks, and that was 2 weeks ago sort of thing. So it doesn't really provide clarity, but this is the level that what we're dealing with, and it's quite frustrating for us down here. Because as a farmer, we just want clarity. We want to get on with it. Just put the peg in the sand. So I don't know whether I do want to state that in public, how this is all going at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
I think John.
Oh, John, sorry.
Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, just backing up what Jeremy's saying, look, I think water quality is not high on the agenda of any processes. Farm plan, it's around markets around emissions, and we know how that can be construed and linked to production out the farm gate. I'm not saying there's not a focus on farmers on one, I understand it, but I also understand the loopholes it's going to cause around water quality in Southland. Question to staff, what engagement have you had with the two leading processors in dairy, and what is their feedback? Because I guess we're seeing they're just watching the government and not watching Southland, so how do we get that proper engagement around we're here to do what's right for Southland, and how do we send that message to Wellington but also through to the industry? And there is an element of frustration that obviously they want to do the right thing, but the neighbours aren't going to follow that unless there's a clear guidelines and muddle messaging and what are we 25 days out, 35 days out. Yeah, we've got a bit of an issue coming in about 6 weeks, so just, yeah.
Through you, Chair, we're actually in constant contact with the processes, in particular, obviously, Fonterra is the largest, and that happens at a number of levels, from meetings with Rob Stevens and, Rachel and I jump in when needed, that occur regularly, right down to then at a application of regulation level as well. And so we have, all of those levels, constantly listening to them, talking to them, explaining, they're explaining back, so that we can be as aligned as possible, because we all have different, influence points into central government, and leveraging each other's influence is quite critical to get a Southland solution. In terms of the frustration, absolutely acknowledge that. We're also meeting frequently with ministry officials to explain, and improve their understanding exactly how and why our water and land plan is the way it is with respect to Appendix N and the evidential basis that underpins that, along with through the various decisions by the court, the various appeals, how those work and why they work in concert with everything else in the plan. Liz is looking like she might also want to jump up.
Mr. Phillips would like to jump up.
Just a quick one, just to add to the conversation. I've got to catch up with Rob Stevens this afternoon.
The supplementary Appendix N, we need to make sure the community understand. Without Appendix N, the farm plans will not improve water quality. That is a reality. Yes, Appendix N isn't perfect. It's not 100% equitable. We know that because it's been through the house to come out of the court, but it's a starting point. And if Southland loses that, it gets taken away by Wellington. Once again, another 3 years of not improving the water quality in Southland. So quite frustrating as a councillor.
And just before I pass over, important that councillors are all on the same page with this as far as the messaging. So that's one of the reasons that we've got a briefing following this meeting. Councillor Gibson, and then I've got Councillor Rose first, and then Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, look, I just had a question on the top of page 28, and it was talking about wastewater regulations that are coming in. It talks about, however, depending on the final form of the proposals, may lead to an oversimplified approach to managing wastewater treatment and discharge, potentially creating challenges for integrated water resource management and increased disparities among different user groups. What disparities are we talking about?
Through here, I can answer that. So as we know, there are new wastewater treatment standards. They're very different to the old regime. We remain concerned that that will, in the fullness of time, create a challenge in terms of farmers having to pick up the slack, if you know what I mean. So sorry, I shouldn't probably, it's a bit of an informal term. And so we're concerned about that quite significantly, what that means. So it is a challenging situation. And we actually are arranging a meeting next week, I believe, to sit down with the new head of the Invercargill City Council, VM Water, start to talk through what this new world looks like for them, and understand their investment proposals, consenting, things like that, to work out how we can support them, how we can support water quality outcomes across Murihiku. So as these water entities kind of get up and running, obviously STC have an in-house situation. We're making sure that we're in constant communication to try and mitigate any perceived or actual equity impacts with respect to water quality. But we wanted to put it on there just to note that it is a live issue for us. It's about the implementation of regulation, which is sometimes more important than the legislation or regulation itself. So we want to make sure that we're working collaboratively with water service entities for structures within the territorial authorities, to make sure that we're all on the same page, moving forward together, that, their ratepayers are getting what they need, our ratepayers getting what they need, and collectively, that, water quality improves.
It would be nice to think we have one standard of water quality or two different variations.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, thanks for your patience.
Hogarth did actually define something. He said that the farm plans will not be necessary in any land area under 50 hectares. He did that publicly. So if that doesn't come through, I will be irate because I got 22 hectares.
Thank you, Councillor.
Some big claims.
Any other questions? I'm going to ask somebody to move that recommendation that we received the report. Councillor Rose, seconded Councillor Evans. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried, thank you. Thanks, team. I like the new format. I haven't had any complaints, so I'm assuming that means nobody else does either. 9.2, strategy and policy and regional planning update. Welcome, Liz and team.
Through you, Chair, this is Claire Thuney, who is the acting manager currently, while Marcus Roy is enjoying himself in a European spring.
Oh,
Yes, I let him out of the
I hope
building.
he's having a lovely time. Thanks, Liz.
Happy to take this report as read. It's an update on where we're at with a number of projects. However, there's some changes so that we since the report was put on the agenda. First is in relation to the timeframes for the plan modification requests. I can confirm that the investigation reports the MFE commissioned on their plan modifications have been completed and are now, we're waiting on them to be presented to the Minister for Resource Management Reform. At that stage, we will see that report, and then the community will see that report as well, and likely that will be aligning at much the same time in early May. So that's in the report about April, May. So at the moment, the indications are that we are still going to see it in May. The consultation process is likely to be quite tight because the time frame to get the actual decision is still trying to be completed prior to elections this year. The other update is in relation to the Gore District Plan Review. Just an update on that. We have filed a notice of intention to be as an interested party to one of the appeals that has been lodged on the Gore plan, and that's in relation to the groundswell appeal, which sought the removal of provisions relating to Section 6, which were matters of national importance. Given that we made a submission on the natural hazards provisions, we felt it was important that we keep in that conversation, because one of the matters of national importance is in relation to natural hazards, among other matters that we as a regional council are interested in. And so when you lodge a notice of intent to be a what we call a 274 party, which is a interested party with that appeal, doesn't necessarily mean that we oppose the appeal or we have an opinion on it at this stage. We are and as an interested party and will be part of those conversations. So that was done, it was last week. That was filed, so we wait to see what timeframes will be with that appeal and how those appeals progress. In terms of the Invercargill City District Plan, there's a note here that will just give you an indication of timing of that work. We are hoping to see a Section 42 report, which is the Invercargill City Council's recommendation in response to all of the submissions that they've received, and that should come next week, the 20th of April. And from there, we get the opportunity to either put in expert evidence in response or legal submissions in response. So that's over the period of about the 4th and 11th of May. So that's once we've seen the recommendation report, we'll be able to work out what level of evidence we're required to put in response to that. But that's really the updates I've got. If there's anything that.
No, in regards to the long-term plan, obviously next steps are the workshop on the 7th of May, which will be the direction setting. And then I believe you just touched on regional spatial planning quite well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Any questions? Chairman McFarlane and Councillor Morrison.
I've just got a couple of questions. First, just around the plan modification proposals. Is it, when we sort of first started talking about it, I thought the minister could just come down and tweak it, but they still have to go out to consultation. Like, again, this is a drawn out process. We're trying to, I'm just reiterating the drawn out. It always seems very difficult to do some of this stuff. And, you know, when I saw these dates, I go, oh, we've got to go through another process, which that's the way it works. But we probably can understand that when we're sort of asking them to do a wee tweak.
It is, while it may seem like a few months is a long time, and the scheme of having to do a formal plan change, that can potentially take years. There's no appeal process for this, so the ministry also gets to determine who's a likely affected party in terms of consultation. So how broad they go with that consultation phase. We'll wait and see.
That'll be a narrower.
The legislation always had an indication of a process, so that the minister couldn't necessarily just come in and make a change to a plan. And it's great that we've got a chance to be involved in seeing what those recommendations are, feeding back to us.
And just quick question, just around, I am getting a few phone calls about up in my area, the Gore District Plan, and we have responded to where we need to in regards to what's our position on things, which we have. When we've done the appeal, we're an interested party, we can sit in all the whole process, or is it only on a specific? We're talking about natural hazards. So do we sit in the whole appeal scenario?
We get to sit in on the appeals, the process relevant to the groundswell appeal,
Not
all of the other appeals.
Can I ask, is the groundswell, obviously the iwi discussion is quite a focal point up there at the moment in regards to around cultural values and things like that. Just and I mean, that's the thing, just trying to get the understanding of some of these things. There's obviously a lot of media attention to it. Is that part of the groundswell? I'm just asking, just out of interest.
The appeal that they lodged, from my reading of it, is relatively broad, and in its reference to Section 6 matters, there are a number of cultural elements to that, that may pick up some of the iwi related rhetoric that's out in the public at the moment. But,
through you, Chair, I would also add that our primary purpose for seeking to become a party via Section 274 is primarily to ensure that the natural hazards aspects of just, you know, the reason why we made a submission primarily in the first instance are appropriately covered off. So that's our main interest in seeking to be in the room with respect to the groundswell appeal.
And on top of that, we've also referenced the requirement to be consistent or give effect to our regional policy statement, which touches on a number of those other matters. So we're in the room when they're having those conversations.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison, then Councillor Rose.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to return to the plan modification proposals that the Chairman raised. What information on that process is available to the public? What means in terms of the process we're going through? Because I understand this is a kind of a temporary fix given the imposition of no further plan change from the minister. So we've got this period for a period of months where we're doing something alternative to what is has been standard and what might be standard in the future. So in terms of public visibility of that process, how does a member of the public, a ratepayer of Southland, get visibility of that?
My understanding is that there is actually a website, a Ministry for the Environment website. We don't have anything in our public facing documents. It is a process run through the Ministry for the Environment, so that's where it's currently sitting. There's only been one other successful plan modification process that's throughout the country. So most of the information for that will be on that website. But once we do go out, the Ministry goes out to community consult, at that stage, we're working with their communications team to see how we might be able to assist in making it more visible.
So that kind of connects to the second of three questions, which is how is public consultation on proposed changes provided for within that process? It sounds like the Ministry will lead on that. My concern is that they're based in Wellington, we're based in Southland, and it directly impacts Southland ratepayers. So I would be really keen to make sure that we do work closely with them to make sure that anyone who needs to be given or afforded the opportunity to consult is not denied that, especially given you've said there's a pretty short timeline for that consultation expected.
So while it is run by the Ministry for the Environment, they are in contact with us and have sought our assistance in that process to identify who we might think are potentially affected parties, and if we need to go broader into the wider community, then we will assist in using our channels to help them promote their work.
And so I guess my third question is is there a sense from staff as the process as it's currently mapped and being run, is it available for public transparency and does it support democratic outcomes for Southland? Because it seems that this is a solution that is we're imposed by central government as an interim solution, and it's potentially denying democratic visibility to the ratepayers of Southland. And we should be advocating every way possible to ensure that we shine a light on this particular issue so that people can engage if they wish to do so. But I have a sense that the process as currently designed is not optimised for democratic outcomes.
Through you, Chair, if I may answer that question. That's correct in essence, and when we were workshopping this with you publicly, we did call out that feature, shall we say, of this particular pathway, including its unusualness and with respect to democratic input. And so, at that time and now, we're committed to using our own communications channels to ensure that as far as we're able to within somebody else's legislative process and, documented process to get that transparency and seek that input from our communities.
Councillor Rose, and then.
Yeah, we're just interested in the links between the spatial plan and the LTP, given that you talk about in the spatial planning, it's a strong and credible foundation that can be developed over time rather than looking in detailed approaches too early. So are we going to end up with two lots of work, or is one going to somehow complement the other? I guess it's around cost and time.
Through you, Chair, that is an excellent question, and I am pleased that you've picked up on it. Absolutely, the answer is yes. Now, whilst the timing is not ideal, because one's our timing, the long-term plan, and indeed actually all of local government's timing, and then the other is central government's timing through, the legislative process and then what they've actually written in that legislation. We have been talking not just within Environment Southland at a staff level, but also collectively across all of local government and with Te Ao Marama about how we have to bring these things together. The hard time will be the first time, if you will, because it's not exact, because it hasn't been designed, this new legislation hasn't been designed with careful thought about local government's long-term plan processes and indeed actually others' investment processes, because the regional spatial plan is not just local government's view or the community's view and Mana Whenua's view, it's also the Crown's view. There's an extensive participation required by infrastructure entities And they will also need to be putting their stake in the sand around their own infrastructure provision over 30 plus years and how they're going to fund that. And so we have, through our long-term plan, a part to pay around considerations around the fundability of what we're putting into that regional spatial plan that will need to come out, be discussed, consulted with the community on, and then expressed through the long-term plan. There'll need to be, alignment between those two processes so that we ultimately end up with a very hand-in-glove approach, not just with ours and the territorial authorities' long-term plans, but also with things like the National Land Transport Fund, for all of those infrastructure providers that are led centrally, and the funding often determined nationally, or at least a degree of nationally and then regionally, like National Land Transport Fund through into the Regional Land Transport Fund. That also needs to be aligned as well. So it's going to be a really complicated process, but once we've sort of done the first one and this LTP, it should become a more of a standard mode of operating for local government, the Crown, to ensure that the funding, the implementation of what's in the regional spatial plan is completely aligned and enabling of the regional spatial plan outcomes, which is why, ensuring that our engagement with our communities, with businesses, with industry, with the sectors is going to be so critical, because this, the importance of the regional spatial plan for achieving the outcomes we want to see for Southland cannot be understated in my view.
And if I might just add to Hayley's information, there's also the need for an agreed data set to inform all of that. I know there's some work going on in the background at staff level, so that the population, projections or the economic projections, that data is, the source of that data is common and agreed, so that it can then feed into those further conversations.
So can I have a supplementary?
Sure.
Chair? So in summing that up, then the LTP will look different, and the spatial plan is the most important one. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Through you, Chair. Yes, I think the LTP will look different because by the time we complete it, we'll be in a completely different legislative framework in a number of areas potentially. And I feel reasonably confident in saying that, although obviously, you are the governors of that and the deciders of that. So it's up to you. I think that the regional spatial plan is super critical for Southland as well, and it will be tricky because the timing may not always align, and maybe I'm asking for your forbearance in advance for this triennium as we sort of move through, because whilst an LTP is very well understood, a regional spatial plan is new for Southland. Probably a bold call to say it's the most important thing. I probably have to try to that.
I'm nodding. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Hodson.
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to circle back to the plan modifications conversation and perhaps ask whether changes to both the local government minister and the Minister of the Environment have influenced the changes in timeframes.
Through you, Chair, no. The decision-making power is still with Minister Bishop. Minister Simmons, I believe, delegated that power across to Minister Bishop. My understanding is that that delegation still remains in place despite the new Minister of the Environment.
I have two quick questions about the natural hazards. Firstly, 84 requests for the year. Is that an increase? And therefore, is this information publicly available? So is there something missing that they're needing to make specific requests?
Through you, Chair, can you perhaps talk about what the portal does and then what the inquiries do? That's likely to might by way of illustration.
Yeah, just briefly.
So there is a lot of information that is public on our website. So we have what we call the South Natural Hazards Portal, information portal. So you can go onto that, type in your address and find information on a range of hazards for that area. Some of it is at a property, you might be able to drill it down to your property. Some of it is broader, it hasn't been developed specifically for a point in region, but a broad. So that's what the hazards portal does, and it is accessible. And a lot of the inquiries we can respond to with saying, actually, have you had a look at the portal? And it's helping educate people to know that that's there and how it might be worked. A lot of the inquiries we get in relation to maybe a specific subdivision that people are proposing to do, and at that stage, they are requesting are required under the Resource Management Act to have a natural hazards risk assessment, and the decision makers have to consider that in their decision. So the inquiries are coming to us asking for information that might help inform that risk assessment. So some of the information will be the same as what we've got on the portal, but it may be a wee bit more specific. They might be wanting to know background reports to what is on. And also at the moment we have a what we call a LIM, so a land information memorandum portal. So when you get a LIM report when you're buying a property, we have to provide all the information that we have for on hazards to that report to the TAs, so the TAs can access that, and by providing that information to people on LIM reports, people are now receiving those LIM reports and maybe just questioning some of the information. So, thank you.
Great questions, team. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll ask somebody to move that recommendation to receive the report, please. Mr. Moses, Mr. Pemberton, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. 9.3, the 2026 Murihiku Southland Climate Change Impact Assessment.
Through you, Chair. Karen is either unwell or online. She's online.
How come? Trying to find. His father's name by mistake. That was Nigerian. Shows my age. Welcome, team.
Kia ora koutou. Have with me here today Chris Jenkins, who is the Principal Scientist Hydrology, and apologies that Karen's not able to be here in person to support the item, but apparently she is online. So this is quite a massive report that we are presenting today. Hopefully the councillors are familiar with the Regional Climate Change Working Group, the interagency working group that is working together to develop a regional response to our changing climate. It's also a topic of the next agenda item. But this group came together in 2023 and initially relied on the 2018 report that was produced by NIWA, which is called the 2018 Southland Climate Change Impact Assessment, to guide, it was like a key cornerstone report and guide where the climate change, interagency climate change group and all of the individual partner agencies as well, to inform the previous LTP cycle. But a strong message from that group was that we really needed to update that. And since that 2018 report, we've had the AR6, IPCC AR6 report released globally in early 2023, and it was time to update that 2018 report. So that became quite a massive thing to commission as part of the previous LTP cycle. And as part of commissioning that report, we worked really closely with our partner agencies to make sure that the needs of our partner agencies were taken into account in scoping for that report. In terms of the timeframes that we wanted to look at and the projections, And yeah, that has taken quite a bit of time to work through, and we are very pleased that we are now able to release this. And Chris, who has been working through a lot of the detail of this report, is going to talk through some of the high-level findings.
So, as Anne mentioned, there was a 2018 climate change impact assessment, and this used the 2025-26 report. It's using improved higher resolution models, and there are 3 different emission scenarios, and the predictions are for mid-century and late century. The report initially was meant to be completed in June 2025, but there was a transition from Niuata Earth Sciences and some issues with the supercomputer. It has been delayed, but we're really happy to have it now. To summarise the 4 volumes to the report, the first volume is the main report, which is basically a summary of the other 3 volumes. It does a really good job actually explaining how the methodologies work and the results, and has a breakdown of the different parts of Southland, and also a very good section on impacts on industry. The second volume is the atmospheric report, which has most of the actual climate stuff like air temperature, solar radiation, etc. And then the third volume is the hydrology report, and the fourth volume is a coastal ocean report. So anyway, the key findings that have come out of the report is that air temperature is projected to increase across all of the different emission scenarios, and as much as like 3.4 degrees by the end of the century. It's going to be more hot days and heat waves, but we'll see also like a decrease in frost days. Annual rainfall is projected to rise by up to 12% by the end of the century, and see some larger rainfall events. Maximum annual one-day rainfalls going to increase by up to 22 millimetres per day by 2090. Significant changes to snow volume, 50% decreases projected by 2050, and the snow line could actually rise as much as almost 700 metres by 2090. Wind speed sees very little change, just a slight increase, and river flow. We're going to see more change in extremes. For example, like mean annual floods are going to increase. River flows generally will increase in about 90% of the reaches, and this is mainly due to those increases in rainfall. And we're also going to see decreases in low flow, such as the Q95. And these increases in air temperature, they will be also affecting water temperature. We're going to see some increases projected up to like 4 degrees under the worst case scenario at the outlets of some of our main river stems by 2090. Pretty much the main points summarised, but there's a lot of detail, particularly in the main volume.
So the full copy, all 4 volumes of the report, are now available on our website. It is quite an extensive report, and for a comparison, the 2018 report with 138 pages. I'm not quite sure what the exact page number is across all 4 volumes, but it's quite significantly more than that. So we're now in the process of working through the detail of all of that, and thinking about what the implications are for Environment Southland, but also hoping to be in a strong position to brief the Regional Climate Change Working Group at their next workshop on the 8th of May, to bring it into the interagency space as well, and so that we can work on what the implications for all of our local government partner agencies. So given the report is so chunky, I really admire Chris in terms of his ability to go through all of the detail as a knowledgeable scientist. Not quite as capable, but communicating the report and making it accessible to the likes of myself and everyone else, is quite an important component that we need to still work on. We've done what we need to do to be able to release the report for today, but there is still a significant amount of work to go in terms of making it more accessible, and that'll take a little bit more time to work through and develop tools to make sure that we've got it easily available online and in other forms as well. It's also going to be quite important to informing the Regional Natural Hazards Knowledge Assessment, which is a project that's underway. That's a project that was scheduled for this financial year. That is also quite an extensive project, being led by the Environment Southland Science team, and a really important component to figuring out what are those next steps as well. So this report combined with that natural hazards assessment will also be quite key in forming the current LTP cycle that we're going into. It's in terms of where flood modelling projects are at, there are certain flood models that will need to be backcast with this information, and then it will also be incorporated into whether the flood modelling projects are that are in process at the moment will be just directly incorporated into those. And a key part of this information will be coming to you at various stages as we work through the LTP process and in the Regional Climate Change Working Group phase, as we work through the phase 3 ongoing climate action planning process, and then integrating those two processes together in terms of figuring out what that way forward is. So it's not going to be a one and done briefing today. It is going to be, this is the report, it's landed, we're pleased about that, but we're now working in the background to keep on analysing it and processing it, and we'll be coming back to you with further discussions around the implications. Happy to take questions.
Thanks. Okay, and Chris, I'm quite excited by this report, even though I know there's still lots more reading to do. Councillor Evans, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. Just reading all the information. May just be my lack of intelligence here. It just says key findings: the wind speeds increased by 3.7. And then under the opportunities it's got here, because we're talking about a lot of wind farms as well, that wind generation could increase under future warming. And then under the risks, we've got a bit of a contradiction saying a decrease in summer wind magnitude could impact wind generations. One saying increase wind generation, and the risk is decrease it. So the risk that we've got windier conditions. So, and one thing is saying we're going to have a decrease in the risk, and the other one is saying we're going to have windier conditions. I would like less wind after the summer we've had. Seems to be increasing by more than 3.7%.
So the reason it's as a risk and an opportunity there is the timing of the wind speed dropping coincides with power generation when we've got low levels in the lakes. So it means that wind is not going to be there to supplement the low lake generation.
Thanks. Councillor Morrison, then Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Really good resource, this report. Thank you. Challenge I sense is in how to communicate to the public the various and rich detail within that. You naturally, much of this discusses average changes, and I guess from experience in the environment, not necessarily say the environment, working in the environment, it's actually the extremes that are the things that cause you the most challenge. And I sense within this we are likely to experience less benign environment. So perhaps maybe the question is what do you see as the communications challenges, and perhaps highlighting also the extremes that are inherent in a changing climate and how that might influence public perception of the challenge?
I think the spatial differences especially can be difficult to communicate, because we've got some indications where, for example, some rivers are going to see some decreases in flood magnitude, like for instance the Upper Waikaia with the decrease in snow. We're going to see lower flood magnitudes, but at the same time we're going to see increases in the Mataura River stem, and just trying to communicate that it's extremely difficult without isolating these locations, and we're currently trying to work out how best to communicate that. It's very tricky. Generalizing stuff, it can work at one level of audience, but for another level of audience or planners, it's something that we are working on.
Thank you. The second question was, are you aware if other regions have invested in a similar updated analysis, and have they used the same scenario set? Have Earth Sciences used the same scenario set if they're doing that in other regions?
I've seen some very similar work that was done at Horizons, and a number of other councils are having some work done. It's in the pipeline now, and they're very keen to actually see our report today. They haven't been able to view this because it hasn't been released, but they're wanting to have a look at what we've done here.
And it would probably be a fair assumption that Earth Sciences continue to apply the same three scenarios to their analysis for other regions.
I think that there might be some slight differences in which ones they will select.
Did we stipulate which three, or did
yes,
we did? Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Rice, then Councillor Hodson.
Yes, I guess, firstly, the cost of it, just wondering what the cost was. And I guess the second bit is around some of the findings. Well, do you know the cost?
No, sorry.
So we'll move on to the next bit. It's around some of the comments around agriculture, because you've actually got increased growing days, so it's longer growing season, which seems to me like a huge positive actually. And then in places you talk about the annual rainfall rise of up to 12%. My rainfall goes from 9 to 1200 mils a year. Massive change. 12% doesn't seem huge at all. And then of course you've got a bit on the other talking about erosion and stuff. But given the longer growing season, it looks pretty positive for us.
Yeah, there are opportunities available.
Yeah.
But I just check on that also will enable the pest plants and the weeds to grow better too, Councillor. So there's a flip side to that.
Basically, things like facial eczema creeping south.
Councillor Hodson, thanks.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you for providing the report. Looking forward to finding some time to read it in its entirety. A couple of the things that I wanted to touch on have sort of been raised by others, but I will mention them again because I think they're very important. There's really two kind of main areas that I would like to see the council putting some emphasis on going forward. One's been mentioned around the comms. Really important that this investment is translated into information and knowledge that supports our communities to develop in more sustainable ways. And also, I think we need, an emphasis on informing future work for council. And there's three areas that I'm thinking of immediately, but there may be more. So I'll mention those now, and then there's a couple of other things I'd like to circle back to, if that's okay. So particularly the flood modelling, I think it's really timely that this information feeds into delineation of our regional floodplains, and I'm interested to understand what the spatial extent of hydrodynamic models, now that we've got regional LiDAR available, we've got these scenarios, we can refine our delineation of floodplains, and that will support our planning frameworks that would ideally have fed into our flood control bylaw, but that may have to be a second bite, I guess, or third, so to speak. Do we have an understanding of that at this point, what the extent of hydrodynamic models that have been informed by LiDAR and these scenarios is?
There have been some that have been developed using the LiDAR around the Mataura, and some work being done around the Bremer at the moment.
Okay.
As well.
So specific locations, not spatially extensive at this point?
That's correct.
Some of the other work that I think would be really valuable for this to feed into, particularly to support our communities and their investments in the future, is perhaps relooking at the Crops for Southland work that's been undertaken in the past, and understanding, what opportunities could exist in terms of diversification of agricultural and horticultural crops that will be growing in the region, as well as the Growing for Good work that NFE led in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think also particularly important that this flows through into our planning and development frameworks, spatial planning frameworks particularly. So there's a couple of things that I think we really need a bit more on. I'm concerned that water availability doesn't feature in there. So we're talking about a reduction in snow volume, but I'm not seeing a flow through of that finding to risks or opportunities in terms of water availability, aquifer recharge. Similarly, I'm not seeing the flow-on effects to our ecosystems and biosecurity. We heard facial eczema mentioned, other fungal diseases. So, as well as, I guess, the risk of incursion of species, increasing tree line elevations, flow-on effects to regional water budgets. So I think we need to think really clearly through the mechanistic implications of the findings and how they will impact on a range of processes that drive risks, drive use of land. Soil moisture isn't something that's currently mentioned there, but it's impacted by temperature, rainfall, a number of wind speed, those factors. So that impacts growing days. It also has, I think, a real potential to be a risk to agricultural production when we see increased periods of soil moisture deficit and constrained growth occurring. And then I think relatively minor at this point, but this needs to be worked on more. At the moment, agriculture features twice under opportunities, but I think the second reference is a risk, and it probably just needs to be under the right heading. I think there needs to be an increased emphasis on coastal erosion there, and an understanding of what that means, and particularly wherefore. That's me for now.
Thanks, Councillor. I think you make good points, and they're all going to have to come back to us in many ways, because it's fundamental. Councillor Karen has I might just throw to you first to answer Councillor Rose's question.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and forgive me for coughing. But in terms of,
than here.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Through you, Chair, just in terms of the contract cost, the cost of this work, despite the contract going over time and the multiple, redos due to the technical challenges, the work has come in on contract price. So we've not paid any additional costs for the extra work that's had to be done, and we've also discussed getting some rebate in terms of the fact that it has gone well over time as well, through some additional work from Earth Sciences NZ. I don't think I can comment on the actual cost in public forum due to commercial sensitivities, but I can just check on that and provide that information if that's allowed.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Pemberton, you're last.
Yep, thank you. We had a great report. I've heard it a couple of times now. Fantastic for spatial planning around agriculture, and renewable energies. Some real opportunities here, but some challenges. I think falls in the ICM category quite importantly around, repairing planting for stream, support, trying to hold that stream temperature at least, if we're going to see a challenge around those water temperatures on rural properties. And I guess I've already asked this question before in another forum around, where can we look for, where's New Zealand, where's Southland going? And I think the response was we can look within provinces of New Zealand. So maybe we need to start looking across borders to see how they're operating, to see how we may look in our environment going forward. But couple of questions. Well, a question, I guess, to Phil's point around communication, and I think there's been enough climate science around now. Look, I remember being much younger and hearing them talk about the North Island being like the tropics and getting slammed by storms regularly. And what are we seeing? Is there some much previous expectations on where the climate in Southland was going to go lining up for now, and how does that look? Because I think if we can just say, look, this is the science, guys, it's proven time and time again to be right, we have to get on with it. It takes away a lot of the noise and the distractions we're currently dealing with, because good old internet makes everyone an expert. It would be fantastic if we could just find a way of subtly sending that message that this is the trajectory we're on, and we've got to learn to adapt. If we can influence, we'll try, but adaption's key for now, for those ratepayers that can have some effect. So, yeah, so just really supporting that we get the most out of this report. It touches everybody in Southland. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Somebody like to move, we receive that report. I hope it's got pictures. Councillor Morrison, Councillor Hodgson, second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Agreed. And I was going to stay with this because we are now on 9.4 in the climate change and community resilience portfolio. Thanks, Karen. Go and have a rest.
So just moving on to the next agenda item, and Lindsay here in support of me for this item. This is an update on where the progress that has been made as part of the Regional Climate Change Working Group space. The key milestone since the previous strategy and policy meeting is the fact that we had our first governance workshop on the 12th of March. We've got quite a mix of new governance representatives and experienced governance representatives that were part of the group from the previous triennium. So having that mix is quite good, really. And what one of the key goals of that first workshop was making sure that everybody was arriving at the same starting line, so to speak, in terms of understanding where the group from the previous triennium had got to, and what we are needing to do for this coming triennium. So setting up the group to really kickstart into phase 3, which is the climate action planning cycle, which will inform the Environment Southland LTP, but also at the same time, the intention is that it will inform all of our local government LTPs and by nature keep some alignment in this space. So as part of this update, I've listed a few of the actions from the Regional Framework for Action as well, where some progress has been made since the previous strategy and policy update. And attached as an appendix is the interagency report. That is a report that we produce after every governance workshop to provide a summary of what that workshop is about, so that the Strategy and Policy Committee are up to speed with the direction of that group. So the interagency report is a little bit more detailed than you might have seen in the past, but this is probably also useful in the sense that this is the first report for the new triennium, so containing a bit more background than it usually does. So the key messages at the back of the report, perhaps Councillor Morrison would like to expand on those as the chair of the Regional Climate Change Working Group, and otherwise I'm also happy to take questions.
Morrison, do you want to say anything now or wait?
There was a number of key messages which probably reflects the enthusiasm of the new working group and the thing that people wanted to contribute, but all valid. Perhaps maybe comment on and perhaps ask a couple of questions in relation to some of them. The Climate Change Community Perception Survey was a rerun of a survey done a couple of years ago, so updating stats. How far away are we from the final report summarising those outcomes
Yeah, we are very close to having a final report. The focus for the strategy and policy meeting was the previous agenda item in terms of the science report, but the perception survey report is imminent, so I expect that will be released as part of the next strategy and policy meeting.
Thank you. And maybe I could just point out that we've got the South and Climate Change Impact Assessment Report, which was briefed in the previous agenda item. But another resource we've got is the local government sector climate scenarios. Now, each of those reports reflect 3 scenarios, global scenarios that were downscaled and applied to New Zealand and the region in order to make sense of what it means for us. I would just note that there was an overlap where the 3 scenarios used by the local government sector climate scenarios and the 3 chosen for our regional update, 2 were the same, but there was 1 outlier in each. So they're not exactly the same 3, they don't map directly to each other. Why I'm just flagging that now is that as we move forward into the LTP cycle, there is a decision for us as a council and discussions to be had with other councils. If we're going to rely on scenario-based assumptions or planning for the future, there's a requirement for us to be quite explicit around which scenarios we believe are appropriate to guide our LTP and regional spatial planning into the future. And it need not be necessarily a single scenario that we settle upon. You might, for instance, say for certain outcomes, we will take the most likely scenario. For long-lived infrastructure, where there's an investment that may go for 50 to 100 years, you might say, in this case, we think it's appropriate to provide the worst case scenario or the more extreme one because we want our infrastructure to withstand the tests and challenges of peak events, whatever that may be. So I'm just flagging that there's probably a conversation that we'll likely be keen to have with councillors in the months ahead as we get into LTP is what is the appropriate planning assumptions as they relate to climate change scenarios that we think are appropriate to guide our thinking on LTP development and subsequently regional spatial planning, which is so the question of those 2 things will progressively come together and merge into a single line of thinking, but there's a little bit of work required to generate that convergence.
Yeah, thank you, through you, Chair. The Earth Sciences report that we spoke about in the previous agenda item was scoped prior to the release of those local government funding agency scenarios. And so we didn't have any say about what the local government funding agency was doing in terms of the scenarios they were choosing, but it is a useful starting point to look at where those the science that we have just recently released in those local government funding agency scenarios, how they correlate. Climate change scenarios are a really useful planning tool for testing our assumptions as we're going into the LTP cycle and whether we're doing enough to consider our response to our changing climate. And so the climate change scenarios themselves were one of the things that we workshopped with the Regional Climate Change Working Group as a way of considering those different futures and what we need to be doing as we're going into the ongoing climate action planning phase. So I really would like to also encourage, if you haven't seen those scenarios, there is a website link that is included as a footnote in the interagency report to go and have a look at those as well, and happy to work through them in a bit more detail if that would be appropriate for the council at some stage.
Thanks. All right, Councillor Maths.
Yeah, just the one point, and I suppose it's relating to what Councillor Morrison and Councillor Pemberton made. So thinking about some of the events we've had over the last period of years and understanding that this modelling has been done across different regions, looking at what the models, I suppose if we're going to decide on what models we're going to use going forward, understanding what models we're predicting and what's actually happening, and giving us perhaps some direction around what sort of models we might use to predict or to make some assumptions about what the future might look like. So it would be good to see a wee bit of an understanding around what it look like. Make myself clear.
Yeah, I think what's really important, it's not really about picking a scenario or a model. What's really important is, even though we may not the full, we may never get the full range of information ever, and we could keep collecting information. But what with the information that we've got, and that we look at those scenarios, we reflect and we align on those planning assumptions across our local government agencies, and so that we are working across boundaries. I think that's probably more important than getting a particular, scenario and
Yeah, absolutely. But to the point that the stuff seems to be moving quite quickly.
Yeah.
So actually, how we actually come to a point of understanding where we're going, what our planning looks like.
Yeah.
So that we actually aren't getting caught, I suppose.
Yeah.
And maybe like to say, given that the scenarios talk about 2050 and 2090, in due course, we will be able to look back in retrospect and go, wow, that scenario was spot on. It did turn out to be a Mad Max world that we're living in. Or it may be something less challenging than that over time. And I guess we can look at, well, what's actually happening today and which scenario does that point to as the potential likely outcome, or which one do we seem to be most likely tracking towards over time. But it's challenging because it's forward future thinking.
I'd like to think I might be able to look back in 2050.
I'm imagining the outfits and it's put me off. Put me off my game a wee bit. Just my I was going to say old chestnut, but actually it's a young chestnut, because I just want to be reminded perhaps of where the youth engagement part of this sits. I appreciate that it's the regional working group, that's a governance thing, but I'm sure Councillor Morrison knows off by heart, if you don't, Anka, the mentions of how youth engagement might be involved or consulted with.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm hoping that we can work that through as part of where Environment Southland gets to on that work stream. It is an aspiration that was picked up in the regional climate change strategy, that the youth audience is a really important audience, and it's their future. So, empowering our younger people to understand this and, what their future might look like is really quite important. So yeah, currently working through where Environment Southland is at in that space, and then hopefully we can leverage off that as part of the climate change space as well.
And just to note that because we're doing this in partnership with the other TAs and Te Ao Marama Incorporated, if they have an existing youth engagement mechanism, that's an opportunity for us to leverage what they have as we work with them on it in a partnership approach. So if there was a Gore Youth Council, for example, we could potentially leverage or gain insights from that source along with other TAs potentially.
So it might be a good place to start, but there are many other.
Yeah, and during the previous training, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to speak quickly to the youth council that was in existence at the time, the Gore District Council. I guess the opportunity through the climate action planning process, phase 3, is really to look at those interagency opportunities and see if there's something that's not just a little tick box, but a more bigger, meaningful way of engaging, and is there an opportunity to work through that through the processes.
Great. Yes. With that, I'll ask somebody to move the recommendation, please. Thanks, Councillor Pemberton, seconded Councillor Matheson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against. Thank you. Great work, team. We all appreciate how difficult your task is. Tasks. 9.5, letter to the Infrastructure Commission.
Yeah, I think it's a relatively straightforward
Aye.
item, as it is us completing an action requested us by this committee, proving to you that we really do want to ask.
Sian, got anything to add?
No, not much, just to, probably just add that the attached letter has been provided as with the item, so yeah, happy to receive any feedback.
I would just like to say what an excellent measure I thought it was. More firm in a subtle way than we sometimes are, so I was pleased about that. If there are no questions, get somebody to move that, please. Thank you, councillor Evans, second councillor Gibson, all those in favour, please say aye. Yes, great, thank you. In the post, as they say.
Through you, Chair, happy to let you know if and when we receive feedback. And we'll
Appreciate that, thank you. Yep. Perfect. 9.6, an update on councillor requests. So, still formulating my response to the public forum deputation. It needs to be checked. Anything else, Hayley?
Through you, Chair, given the direction that's been provided at the workshop by this committee, which we know as a committee of the whole, with regards to youth engagement, particularly within the long-term plan, that is a core part of our planning. And we'll be sharing more with you at the workshop on the 7th of May. So I'm hoping that you'll be pleased with the direction that we would like to workshop with you. And it's, youth engagement potentially will be integral for what we're suggesting might be some of the strategic framing that will be up for your kicking about, consideration and feedback at workshops.
And the rest of the, can I just correct that it was James Hargest College students, not Fegan College.
Yes.
And the rest of the actions?
Yes, so the next action, there's the briefing now in place for farm plans, which will pick up the any additional information that central government provides to us. But of course, if there's something urgent between now and then, which pops up, we'll be updating you all in the usual manner as well, along with our assessment of what the implications are for Southland and what we're doing to work through that. So we will absolutely committed to, as soon as we know, on farm plans. Indeed, you may, with other hats on, know before us. Then on to the third question. I started to write an answer to this question, but it got too long for the little box. It's a fairly, so I decided to actually provide a verbal update. I hope you don't mind. So I've collaborated a number of answers from across the different functions that intersect with farm plans. So I'll go through these now, and hopefully within those answers, you get the information you require, but obviously happy to take further questions, and if I can answer them now, I will. If I can't, I'll come back again with that specific answer, noting that the previous council session also had questions around the cost of farm plans from Councillor Rose. So in terms of the costs around the freshwater team, I have been liaising with Carl Erickson, who obviously leads our freshwater team, which sits within Sam Roster Stead's division, although I have quite extensive working with that team because I'm on the regulatory and strategy sort of sides of that. So as we've confirmed previously, that team are wholly funded by the Ministry of the Environment's Essential Freshwater Fund, and so come at no cost to our ratepayers. That current position, although as we have shared with you and you have discussed, that funding comes to the end, and we're working through a process around the funding of that team into the next financial year. There are, of course, some ratepayer-borne costs around things that are very small, like computer use, mapping work, and things like that. We are using, on an intermittent basis, a contractor to support us with some of the resources and make sure that they're really fit for use by farmers and are road tested with farmers as well. So there's a little additional cost in that that's funded by, well, at the moment it's funded by the Essential Freshwater Fund, but may indeed going forward, if we continue to use them, funded from the Community Engagement Division's budget. So they have an existing budget of 200,000, which is used for things like communications, marketing, engagement, any legal fees, that contractor work that I mentioned, consumables, those sorts of things. And that was approved for this financial year. There's a question.
Or do you want to talk to me or not?
Well, I'll go through it. Maybe I'll go through it.
Yeah, we'll let Harley finish and then.
So, Mr. Rossiter Stead's here if you need any further information. And so there is a forward work program that's going into the work that Sam is doing with Patrick with regards to company theme. So that's a piece. I also have some information on our compliance side, just one moment, which was the side that Councillor Rose had asked about previously. So in determining what those fees and charges for this round of consultation are, we actually did a process and time and cost mapping exercise to ensure that that fee that's proposed in that fees and charges is appropriate to what the actual fair proportional costs would be for that work that's undertaken by the resource management group. And so the types of activities that they have mapped are things like the receipt of the farm plan from the customer, ensuring that's put in the appropriate location, that's documented. We need to, there's a bit of data entry. Now, as I go through this, we of course, I should say, are always committed to process improvements, which in particular are looking at time improvements and efficiencies with respect to that. So, as we go year on year in this ecosystem, we will of course look to update those fees with a view to dropping them as we get more efficient. We also, so there's entry into our various IT systems that have alerts and things like that. So that'd be part of it. And we set up those future tasks that the regulations will require of us so that we're able to in a timely manner with the customer. We review the part of the plan that's submitted. So at the moment, we don't receive the full farm plan. We receive the action plan. That's part of the farm plan. Just want to let you know that. So if you're thinking that we're getting this 10 to 20 page document from the farmer as part of the regulatory requirements, we don't, we just get the action plan. So just want to make that clear. So there is we do a quality assurance check of what we do have and then also of our data entry as well to make sure that what we're capturing is correct. And that's only fair for the customer and obviously to make sure that our systems are correct. So those are the types of activities that we've mapped, and the sorts of allowances we've made are sort of 0.25 of an hour, so very small quantities of time. And so essentially, that comes under that estimated cost of receiving notification of a certified freshwater farm plan, receiving those fees and charges. So I think hopefully that answers that question. So, it's fair to say that this is not a big cost to council on the resource management group's kind of perspective. And then, so there's a, more cost sitting in the actual freshwater perspective. Happy to take questions on that answer.
Go back to Councillor Gibson and then Councillor Rice. Thanks, Councillor.
Only that 200,000, is that just for expenses and contractors, not salaries?
I'll need to defer. No, it's definitely not for salaries, correct.
It's only expenses and contractors outside.
It's a range of different pieces of work. If you want a bit more detail, Mr. Rossiter Stead could perhaps provide that, but that's what Carl has provided to me. So it's, and that's budgeted, not actuals. You can see that will be here in our, reporting.
Can I have a supplementary on
You
that?
can, Councillor.
Is that the same for all regions?
Through you, Chair, I would need to check in with those other regions, which we're happy to do so.
Thank you.
Councillor Rice.
On fees and charges, page 19, freshwater farm plans receiving $233 and then auditing $233. So that's nearly $500 a year. maybe not audited every year, I guess, but I guess I'm trying to understand with the quantum of what this could be, how it gets to that number, given the quarter of an hour here and 25 minutes there, and it's not much, but the quantum, if you have everybody in, is quite massive, actually, if you do the maths.
Through you, Chair, you're absolutely right, Councillor Rose. So the way we've assessed it is, you know, as you can intuit from my answer, looking at the time taken on an individual basis. And so, yeah, there will be absolutely unders and overs. It's a new kind of thing for us. So absolutely we'll be looking at, you know, when they start to come in, actually, you know, and we're required to, are there more unders than overs? And actually we need to adjust this. Yes, you are quite right. The auditing, we have an understanding of what the regime will be, but we do know that the government, that's one of the things the government is looking at, is what is the auditing regime, and that's very much around assessment of environmental risk of certain types of farming activities. And I think we can all kind of see what direction that's heading in. And so as we go through this regime, is, you know, implementing it at a scale, absolutely we'll be looking at, you know, have we got this right? Or when you look at it collectively across the entirety of the work in that space, are we actually gathering more than it's costing us across the whole of that program or that activity? Then yes, we'll need to revise that cost downward. But at the moment, having received only 19 of these, my understanding is the current number, that is what we think those tasks added up will be, you know, the 0.25, the 0.15. If it turns out to be, instead of 0.25, it's actually 0.2, you're right. Over that many, receiving that many farm plans, it will ultimately end up in a big number variance, which is why we need to, across the course of this next financial year, look at that, and if we need to, adjust it downwards. I'm hoping not upwards. That'd be terrible. And you'd all be very cross with me.
But have subsequent discussions.
Yes, we will. And I would want to have that discussion.
Thanks, Hayley. That covers off the requests and actions. We've yes, reduced that considerably with those at work. Thank you. Somebody like to move?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Everyone get an action onto that list for future.
You raise it now.
Now, could
If it
I
didn't
raise?
come up in the meeting already?
Could I raise the opportunity to track the progress towards delivering the Murihiku Advocacy Forum as a pilot to be trialled for at least a couple of quarters, which was raised before Christmas, but we've struggled to find dates to make it a reality. So
Through you, Chair, I'll defer to Mr. Ross Stead, who's leading that piece of work.
And through you, Chair, if I catch up with you afterwards, Councillor Morrison, I've got an option for you. Everything's ready to go.
And the reason I raise it is because if it was to be offered, if we are going to proceed on offer food deliveries as a pilot, we then want to make sure we provide evidence as to whether or not why you kill it or continue with it or extend the trial period into the future. And that could be something that we report back to the committee in future.
Great. Please include me in that conversation. Mr. Stead, thank you. I'm not to move those things. Thanks, Councillor Clinton. No, that's not really.
I'll see.
Thanks, Councillor Evans. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, read. It brings us nicely to a slightly early finish. Given that there is no yes, sir.
Through you, Chair, does that mean that the briefing on winter grazing could be brought forward?
If the councillors would like to leap straight into that or have a
Could do that.
a comfort, a 5-minute comfort break would, or even, yeah, would be great. Otherwise,
Well, what?
well, God, food.
Staff.
Thanks, everybody. That brings leading to a conclusion.
Chair, can you give the request to?
Oh, sorry.
We stick with the scheduled time. We've got half hour briefing